Major news on a story we've been covering here for the last couple of weeks, and potentially major new stakes for the ex-president in DOJ's criminal investigation into his mishandling of sensitive classified documents. NBC News has learned Trump loyalist Kash Patel is expected to testify soon before a federal grand jury about the documents and Trump's public claims, which Patel has repeated and backed, that he declassified the records he took with him to Mar-a-Lago. The New York Times is reporting that the U.S. Justice Department offered Kash Patel immunity after a federal judge ruled that would be the only way to force him to testify under oath. The New York Times reports this. The decision effectively cleared the way for his testimony and makes moot his Fifth Amendment and self-incrimination claims. And it now makes Patel the steadfast, loyal Trump confidant whom Trump handpicked to deal with the documents and the National Archives, one of the biggest witnesses with potentially incriminating information in a criminal probe inching closer and closer to the ex-president. Joining us now, one of the reporters with the byline on that reporting, Mike Schmidt, Washington correspondent for the New York Times, also an MSNBC national security contributor. Mary's still with us. Mike, tell us what you and your colleagues are reporting.
What's up, world? This is Dr. John. What powerful people fear most isn't elections or bad polls. It's when an insider who knows everything flips or is compelled to testify under oath. That scenario is unfolding right now with Kash Patel, and it should have everyone paying close attention. If you think Donald Trump is not watching every single word of this situation with growing concern, you have not been paying nearly enough attention to how these legal dynamics actually work. Because what is happening with Patel is not just another round of Washington noise that will fade away in a few days. This is the kind of development that fundamentally alters the legal landscape and creates pressure that does not go away no matter how much spin gets thrown at it. This is real. This is serious.
Well, the question of what was going to happen with Kash Patel has sort of been out there for a few weeks. The Justice Department had sort of entered the phase where they were concentrating on these recalcitrant witnesses, these witnesses who had not cooperated or had not provided, accounts that they thought were accurate. And in the case of Patel, last month, he had taken the Fifth Amendment before a grand jury about a range of questions that prosecutors wanted to ask him about the documents, about how the documents were handled. Patel has been the person who's out there in the aftermath of the raid saying that Trump declassified all these documents. Now, if you're the government and you're trying to get to the bottom of everything that occurred here and know, all the facts as possible, you want to talk to him about that, because if the documents were declassified, it would legally change several things around, potentially around this issue. So they wanted to talk to him about that. He refused to do it. A judge refused to go along with the government's efforts to compel him.
And the implications for Trump's legal exposure are genuinely significant. Let me take you inside the mechanics of what happened, because understanding the details is the only way to grasp why this matters so much. Kash Patel, if you do not know the name yet, get familiar with it right now, because this man has become one of the most important figures in the entire Trump legal universe, and not necessarily in the way Trump would prefer. Patel was one of Trump's most loyal and vocal defenders. He went on television repeatedly and told the world that Trump had declassified whole sets of classified materials before ever leaving the White House. He said it with absolute confidence. He said it like a man who knew the facts from the inside, who had been there, who had seen the process unfold.
Now he has received immunity, so he'll have to go before the grand jury and testify and answer all of prosecutors' questions. Now, what remains to be seen is what type of witness he is. Is he someone who just barely answers the questions and gives yes or no answers, or actually provides lengthy, robust responses? And witnesses can take different postures.
I understand Patel's importance to DOJ and that there's an inherently tense relationship between someone like Patel and DOJ. But wouldn't Patel have debriefed Trump's lawyers? I mean, they never alleged that anything was declassified in any of the various jurisdictions in which they've filed legal filings.
Well, it depends how, Trump's legal team is operating and if they've basically done an investigation themselves to figure out what all the facts are. So, we don't know if that has happened. What we do know is that no one has substantiated the claim that Trump declassified these. This is something that has been repeated by Trump allies. Trump himself alluded to it, but
he was essentially serving as a human shield for Trump's most critical legal defense in the Mar-a-Lago classified documents case, vouching for a story that Trump desperately needed to be true. That defense mattered enormously. Because if Trump really did declassify those documents before he left office, the entire criminal case against him becomes much harder to prosecute. The central allegation that he illegally retained classified materials falls apart if the materials were no longer classified when he had them. So having someone with Patel's background and credibility publicly backing that story was invaluable to Trump's legal strategy. Patel had actually worked in senior national security positions. He knew what classification and declassification actually meant in practice.
There's been no evidence to come out that it actually happened. And Trump's lawyers could have, in the special master fight, this fight with the Justice Department about what materials can be kept from the raid, they could have made this assertion and said, yes, these documents were classified and here are the receipts, or here's how it went down. That has not happened. So the claim has remained unsubstantiated. And the question is that why was Patel saying that? Was this simply just typical Trump lying? Was it part of an effort to throw sand in the gears of the investigation? We don't know. But if you're the prosecutors, you want to talk to Patel.
Patel was on a podcast, Mary, we played it on the show yesterday, saying, I'm one with the boss forever. Does DOJ care? If you get immunity, are you expected to act a certain way, or is it just really limited to what you're going to get from a witness in front of the grand jury?
So, the Department of Justice relies on cooperators in many, many cases, criminal cases, and it does offer use immunity, sometimes even to people who they,
So when he said Trump declassified whole sets of materials, it carried weight. It was not just spin from a random surrogate. It sounded like someone with genuine knowledge backing up the story. And that is precisely why federal prosecutors needed to get him in front of a grand jury and ask him those same questions under oath. Because there is an enormous difference between what you say on cable news and what you say when a federal prosecutor is asking you direct questions and you are under penalty of perjury. The public statements are one thing. Sworn testimony is something else entirely. And prosecutors understood that gap perfectly. So they subpoenaed Patel. He initially did what a lot of people in that position do when they want to protect themselves and the people around them.
Believe have committed crimes because that person, if they're important enough and can provide the evidence that the government thinks is even more important to go after a bigger fish, if
like
you
mob
will.
prosecutions,
Yeah, exactly.
All your witnesses are criminals.
Exactly. So they're used to dealing with some, characters who aren't always that credible and who are criminals, frankly. And so here, I think what they're thinking about is, he is so central to this. He's been so close to Trump on this issue. He's been out there spreading this, story about declassification. And so they want to talk to him and they want to get the real deal. Now, I want to make sure people understand what use immunity is, because that doesn't mean Kash Patel cannot be prosecuted for anything related to the mishandling of classified information or the obstruction of justice. It means the prosecution can't use what he says in the grand jury or anything derived directly from that, right? So if there were other evidence of his criminal culpability, it doesn't mean
He invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. He said no, he was not going to talk. He was not going to give prosecutors what they wanted. And then prosecutors went back to a federal judge and obtained something called a grant of limited immunity, which fundamentally changes the legal calculus. What that grant of immunity means in practice is that Patel no longer has the legal right to stay silent on this specific subject. The prosecutors essentially told him, "We will compel you to testify, and whatever you say cannot be used to prosecute you personally." But you have to talk. You have to show up. You have to answer the questions. There is no more Fifth Amendment protection on these matters because we have taken the risk of self-incrimination off the table. So Patel talked before a federal grand jury in Washington under oath, in a room where lying carries serious criminal consequences. And what he reportedly said in that room, what prosecutors now have locked into the sworn record, is not what he had been saying on television. In that gap, that distance between the public Kash Patel and the sworn testimony Kash Patel is exactly what has legal analysts and Trump's team watching this story very, very closely right now. Before you go thinking this is just another round of the same Washington drama that never goes anywhere, I want to slow down and explain why this particular development carries real weight that a lot of the other noise does not. Because there is something fundamentally different about sworn grand jury testimony from a compelled witness with immunity. It is not a press statement. It is not a friendly TV interview where someone can hedge and walk things back. It is not a letter from a lawyer carefully worded to leave every exit open. It is testimony given under oath in front of a federal grand jury with a prosecutor asking direct questions and a court reporter writing down every single word. And if Patel says something in that room that contradicts what Trump has publicly claimed about declassification, and the reporting strongly suggests he did, then prosecutors do not just have a theory anymore. They have a sworn account from an insider, from someone who was there, from someone who cannot now go back on TV and say, actually, I misspoke. That is not what I meant. Because the transcript exists. The testimony is locked in. And prosecutors can use it to attack Trump's defense at every stage of whatever legal process follows. That is not nothing. That is a very big deal. The legal system does not work like a movie. There is no dramatic moment where a single witness walks in, drops a bombshell, and someone gets arrested before the credits roll. What it looks like in reality is a slow accumulation of sworn accounts, evidentiary records, and legal pressure that builds until prosecutors and grand juries decide the time is right to act. And that process is already well underway in this case. Patel's testimony is one of the pieces, a significant one, and understanding exactly why it matters requires knowing the machinery underneath the surface. Once you understand the full scope of what happens when a compelled witness walks into a grand jury room and starts talking under oath about things that directly contradict a principal's public story, this whole situation hits completely differently. Let me build this from scratch, because I really want you to understand every layer of what is happening here. Most people are hearing the name Kash Patel and thinking of him only in one context. Either they see him as a Trump loyalist who is now FBI director and still firmly in Trump's corner, or they see him as a villain, depending on which side of the political aisle they sit on. But what most people are not seeing is the legal tightrope this man is currently walking, and how his position as a key fact witness with testimony already locked into the federal record creates a problem for Trump that does not go away no matter what. Patel does or says publicly from this point forward, because the testimony already happened, the immunity was already granted, the grand jury already heard what he had to say, and that is the part that matters most. You can change your public statements, you can revise your talking points, you can go on television and walk back everything you ever said about a person. But you cannot walk back sworn grand jury testimony. That transcript exists. Those words are locked. And prosecutors have them. That is the reality Kash Patel is living with right now, and the reality Trump's legal team is very aware of. The central question prosecutors needed to answer was straightforward but legally critical. Did Trump have any legitimate legal basis for having those documents? Did he declassify them before leaving office? And if he did not, was he obstructing efforts to get them back? Trump's public answer from the very beginning was essentially, yes, I declassified all of this. He said it on television, his allies said it on his behalf. And Kash Patel was one of the loudest and most credible sounding voices making that claim. Because unlike most of the TV supporters, Patel had actually worked in senior national security positions. He knew what classification and declassification actually meant in practice. So when Patel said Trump declassified whole sets of materials, it carried weight. It was not just spin from a random surrogate. It sounded like someone with knowledge backing up the story. And that is precisely why prosecutors needed to get him in front of a grand jury and ask him those same questions under oath. Because there is an enormous difference between what you say on cable news and what you say when a federal prosecutor is asking you direct questions and you are under penalty of perjury. And reporting on Patel's compelled grand jury testimony, the testimony he gave after prosecutors obtained that immunity order, indicates that under those conditions, Patel did not back up the sweeping declassification claim the way Trump had publicly suggested he would. He did not walk into that grand jury room and say, yes, I personally witnessed Trump sign a blanket declassification order covering all these materials. He did not provide the clean, airtight confirmation of Trump's public defense that Trump's team would have needed from him. And that is the heart of this entire story. That is the thing that matters above everything else when you are trying to understand why this testimony creates real legal pressure. Because if the person who went on television and vouched for your story cannot or will not vouch for it under oath, then you do not really have a defense. You have a story. And stories and sworn testimony are very different things in federal court. Now let us talk about what limited immunity actually means and why it matters so much to the mechanics of this case. Because this is the legal piece that a lot of coverage glosses over, and it is genuinely important to understand. When prosecutors grant a witness limited immunity in exchange for compelled testimony, they are making a specific legal deal. They are saying whatever you tell us in this room cannot be used against you directly in a criminal prosecution of you personally. That protection is real, and it matters for Patel's own exposure. But it does not protect anyone else. It does not protect Trump. It does not make the testimony disappear or seal it away from use in future proceedings. What it does is give prosecutors a sworn account from a witness they cannot otherwise force to speak. And once they have that account, once it is locked into the grand jury record, they can use it to test and attack the defenses of other people in the case, including the central figure the whole investigation was built around. Think about what that means in practice. Prosecutors essentially told Patel, you are going to talk to us one way or another. We would rather give you immunity and get the truth than let you stay silent and protect someone else. And Patel, faced with no other legal option, sat down and talked. And now, whatever he said lives in that record forever, available to prosecutors whenever and however they choose to use it. Legal analysts who have followed this case closely have said that if Patel's testimony contradicts Trump's public narrative about declassification, and the available reporting very strongly suggests it does, that could meaningfully strengthen obstruction and false statement theories against Trump in the documents case. Here is why. If Trump was publicly claiming he had declassified everything, and one of his own top allies and insiders told a federal grand jury under oath that there was no blanket declassification order that covered those materials, then prosecutors have evidence that the public defense was not accurate. And if the public defense was not accurate, it raises questions about whether false statements were made, whether there was an effort to mislead investigators, and whether the conduct rises to the level of obstruction. Those are serious legal theories, the kind that prosecutors build charges around. And now they have sworn testimony from an insider to potentially support them. This is serious. And here is the layer of this story that makes it even more complicated and fascinating right now. Kash Patel is not just a historical witness from the past. He is currently the director of the FBI. Trump appointed him. He sits at the top of the very agency that executed the Mar-a-Lago search warrant in the first place. He is simultaneously a loyalist figure inside the current administration and a key fact witness whose sworn statements are permanently locked into the federal record from a previous grand jury proceeding. That dual role creates a tension that is genuinely unprecedented in modern American legal and political history. Because his testimony already exists, It cannot be unspoken. It cannot be walked back or revised. Whatever he said in that grand jury room is part of the permanent record. And even as he serves as FBI director today, even as he operates entirely within the Trump orbit in his current role, the sworn version of Kash Patel, the one who sat before federal prosecutors and answered questions under oath, is still out there in the record, potentially being used in ways that create serious legal problems for the man who made him FBI director. You genuinely cannot make this up. The broader pattern here is something that legal observers call classic witness dynamics in a complex conspiracy investigation. You start with the outer ring of people, the supporters, the surrogates, the public defenders. You work your way inward using subpoenas and immunity grants and compelled testimony to flip or at least lock in the accounts of people who were closest to the central events. And as the sworn record accumulates, as more and more witnesses are locked into what they actually know versus what they said publicly, the walls around the central target get progressively tighter. Every contradictory piece of testimony from someone who was in the room makes it harder for that central figure to maintain a defense built on claims that his own people are not willing to back up under oath. That is the pattern. And Patel fits directly into it, whether he wanted to or not. The witnesses who get compelled to testify do not get to choose what they remember or what questions they are asked. Prosecutors come in prepared. They have documents, they have records, they have other witness accounts to compare against. And if your sworn answer does not line up with what the documents show, that becomes its own problem. The machinery of a federal grand jury investigation is specifically designed to put pressure on every weak point in a target's defense. And Patel's compelled testimony is exactly the kind of pressure that machinery is built to generate. Now, let me break down the key points that make this situation so significant and why it creates lasting legal pressure that Trump cannot simply wish away. The testimony is already locked in and it cannot be taken back. This is the most important thing to understand about the Kash Patel situation and why it creates real and lasting legal pressure for Trump. The grand jury testimony Patel gave under compelled immunity before federal prosecutors already happened. It is in the record. It cannot be revised, softened, or walked back. No matter what Patel says or does in his current role as FBI director, whatever version of events he provided under oath to that grand jury is now a fixed point in the legal landscape of the Mar-a-Lago documents case. And based on everything that has been reported about that testimony, the sworn Patel did not confirm the sweeping declassification story that public Patel had been telling on television. He did not provide the clean inside confirmation that Trump's defense required from someone with Patel's level of access and credibility. And that gap between the public story and the sworn testimony is exactly the kind of material that prosecutors build obstruction and false statement theories around. Legal analysts who have reviewed the dynamics of this case have said clearly that testimony which undercuts a defendant's stated public defense can meaningfully strengthen the government's case on charges beyond just the possession of classified materials. Prosecutors now have that testimony. They have it from an insider, from someone who cannot claim he did not know what was in those documents or what the declassification process actually required. And that is a significant piece of the evidentiary puzzle that does not disappear regardless of what happens politically in the weeks ahead. The declassification defense was always a linchpin, and now it has a serious problem. Here is why the Patel testimony matters so much in the specific context of Trump's legal exposure in the documents case. From the very beginning, Trump's central defense against the classified documents charges was essentially this: I declassified those materials before I left office, so they were not classified when I had them. It is a simple, clean, easy to understand argument, and if it were true and provable, it would create significant legal complications for the government's case. But here is the thing about a declassification defense. It requires evidence. It requires someone who was there, who was part of the national security apparatus, who actually knows how classification and declassification work, to go on the record and say, yes, I can confirm that a legitimate declassification process occurred covering these specific materials. Kash Patel was supposed to be one of those people. He had the background, the access, and the public credibility to serve as a genuine corroborating witness for that defense. And then he sat down in front of a grand jury under oath and, based on what has been reported, did not deliver that corroboration in the way the defense needed. That is not a minor hiccup. That is the linchpin of your most important defense failing to hold up under the conditions that actually matter in court. Legal pressure does not come from press conferences and TV hits. It comes from sworn testimony and evidentiary records. And right now, the evidentiary record contains Patel's compelled account, and it is not saying what Trump needs it to say. Now, let us be clear about one thing right up front. No single witness's testimony, not Patel's, not anyone else's, by itself sets a guaranteed arrest date or legally locks in a prosecution outcome on a specific timeline. That is not how the system works. Arrest decisions rest with prosecutors. Charging decisions rest with grand juries and senior Justice Department officials. And in a case with as many political and legal layers as this one, timing is never as simple as one testimony dropping in an arrest happening a week later. Anyone telling you otherwise is dramatizing the story beyond what the facts support. But here is what is absolutely true and worth taking seriously. The legal pressure on Trump in the classified documents case is real, and it is cumulative. Every piece of sworn testimony that fails to confirm his public defenses makes his position harder to maintain. Every compelled witness who walks into a grand jury room and tells prosecutors what they actually know rather than what they said on TV adds another layer to a factual record that prosecutors control and Trump does not. Patel's testimony is one of those layers, a significant one coming from a significant witness, and it is now permanently part of that record. The question going forward is not whether this testimony matters. It does. The question is what prosecutors choose to do with it, when they choose to act, and whether the broader legal and political environment gives them the runway to move. And given that the current political environment is not exactly creating smooth conditions for federal prosecutors pursuing cases tied to the sitting president, that timing question is genuinely uncertain. But uncertainty about timing does not mean the legal exposure goes away. It means you have to keep watching closely every day. Those are the things you need to watch. And here is the final point that ties all of this together. Kash Patel is now FBI director. He is inside the Trump administration. He is publicly loyal. But the sworn version of Kash Patel, the one who sat in that grand jury room and answered questions under oath and did not confirm the declassification story, that version exists permanently alongside the current one. And every time Patel's name comes up in a hearing, in an oversight session, in any official context connected to the documents case or Trump's legal exposure, both versions of Kash Patel are in the room. The one who is FBI director today and the one whose testimony is sitting in the federal record. That is not going away. The pressure that creates is not going away. And as more of Trump's former allies and insiders find themselves in similar positions, compelled to testify, locked into sworn accounts that diverge from the public story, the overall picture becomes one of steadily tightening legal exposure that does not move in reverse. The walls are closing in. The dominoes are starting to fall. Each new revelation, each new cooperating witness, each new admission of wrongdoing brings prosecutors closer to building a case that even Trump's political allies won't be able to defend. The question is no longer whether Trump did something wrong. The evidence is overwhelming that he did. The question is whether our legal system is capable of holding him accountable, or whether he is going to find yet another way to avoid justice. What makes this moment particularly significant is that it comes at a time when Trump is already under unprecedented legal scrutiny. He is facing multiple investigations at the federal and state levels. He has been indicted in multiple jurisdictions. He is facing charges that range from financial fraud to election interference to mishandling classified documents. And now, one of his own allies has become a witness against him. That is a devastating blow to any defendant's legal strategy. The prosecutor's decision to compel Patel's testimony sends a message that the courts are not going to tolerate misconduct from Trump's team. It says that no one is above the law, not even those who think they can hide behind loyalty and public statements. It is a reminder that the judicial system, despite all its flaws, still has mechanisms for holding people accountable when they break the rules. Patel's sworn testimony may contradict Trump's declassification defense, increasing his legal exposure in a federal criminal investigation. The outcome will test whether America's justice system can hold the most powerful people accountable, and the next chapter could land without warning.